So you have to do three things simultaneously if you're the United States. Number one, you got to continue the air campaign. Number two, at the same time, you got to find a way to talk about it, because the air campaign is leverage, but it's not the way you're going to end the war. You've got to have some kind of a settlement at the end of the war. And you've got to get the Strait of Hormuz open. And that means troops, and that means lots of troops, and more than 2 MEUs.
That wasn't just analysis, that was a warning, and it just put Trump's entire strategy into question.
There's 1.8 million people approximately that live within, let's say, 50 miles of the Strait of Hormuz, or the northern shore of the Persian Gulf. 1.8 million. And any of those could be terrorists. If we were to put Marines ashore, you're talking about urban conflict. You're talking about something that's far greater than the capacity of 2 Marine landing teams to be able to handle and provide security. So we don't want to do that, but you may have to do it, and you certainly need to be preparing for it.
Now stop and really think about what you just heard, because that wasn't some political commentator. That was a retired 4-star general, someone who has actually planned wars, fought wars, and seen how they spiral when leaders underestimate what they're walking into. And today, he didn't hold back. This wasn't just criticism, it was a direct, methodical dismantling of what's being presented as a plan. And the deeper you look at it, the more unsettling it gets. Because while the public is being told one story, experts are seeing something completely different. Let's break this down step by step, because what General Wesley Clark laid out isn't complicated, but it is serious. First, he says there are 3 things that must happen at the same time. Not 1, not 2, 3. You need a military campaign, you need diplomacy, and you need control over one of the most important shipping lanes on the planet. Miss any one of those, and the entire operation starts to fall apart. Now here's the problem. According to Clark, there's no clear evidence all 3 are actually being handled. And that's where the concern starts. But it gets worse when you look at the geography, because this isn't just about strategy on paper. This is about where this conflict is happening. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points in the global economy. Oil flows through it, trade depends on it, and right now, it's becoming a potential battlefield. Clark points out something most people don't think about: urban conflict. That phrase alone changes everything, because that's not a quick operation. That's not a clean strike. That's not something that ends in a few weeks. That's prolonged, messy, unpredictable. And history shows those are the kinds of conflicts that spiral. Now, while that warning is coming from someone with decades of military experience, there's another perspective adding even more pressure to the situation.
This new deadline that Trump has expanded his deadlines, as he is prone to doing, of saying that in 5 days it'll be then when we conduct these strikes on energy infrastructure if these talks don't go anywhere. But that coincides quite neatly with the arrival of American forces to the region. So there's been speculation that Donald Trump is trying to buy time before a military build-up. What do you make of that speculation?
It appears to me that he's been misinformed. I think his Secretary of War has been deceiving him, has been giving him all these rosy reports. But the fact of the matter is, regardless of how many Marines he's going to bring to the situation, he can't actually make that Strait of Hormuz open by force. Even his own Navy can't do it, even though he said he's going to escort these ships, and then he appeals to the Europeans as if the Europeans have more ships than the US does, which is ridiculous. And then even if he occupies the Khark Island, the whole situation could be devastating. What if you put 4,000 or 5,000 Marines on an island and then they get swamped by Iranian missiles? They will be massacred. So I'm sure his military is telling him all these moves are not going to save the day for him. So he's trying to bluster, he's trying to give all these promises, hoping that somehow the Iranians will allow him some leeway, but they're not allowing him, because for them, as I said, this is an existential threat, and they have very tough conditions in place now. They put like 6-7 conditions.
That's not subtle. That's not cautious language. That's a worst-case scenario being laid out in plain terms. And whether you agree with it or not, it highlights something important. There are serious doubts about how this could play out, because it's not just about getting troops there. It's about what happens after they arrive. Now here's where the tension really builds, Because while these warnings are being made, the messaging coming from leadership sounds very different. That's confidence, absolute confidence. But here's the problem. That level of confidence doesn't match what experts are describing. On one side, you have warnings about escalation, urban conflict, and prolonged instability. On the other, you have declarations that everything is already under control. That gap? That's where uncertainty lives. And in situations like this, uncertainty can be dangerous. Now let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't just about one statement or one moment. This is about two completely different ways of looking at the same situation. One is grounded in military planning, logistics, worst-case scenarios. The other is focused on outcomes, confidence, and projecting strength. And when those two don't align, questions start to build. Because people want to know, is there a clear plan? Is there a defined endgame? Or is this evolving in real time? Now, Clark didn't just talk about the immediate risks. He also pointed out what happens next. And this is where things get even more serious.
If Iran can retaliate, and they do go after the desalination plants and the power plants in the Gulf states, it's going to be a humanitarian catastrophe there also.
Walk us through what the opening hours would look like. Are we talking cruise missiles from submarines, carrier strike groups, stealth aircraft like the F-35? And what is the role of cyber warfare? I mean, could the U.S. cripple power plants without dropping bombs?
We could cripple some power plants without dropping bombs. But I think you'd see instead that this would be B-52s and B-2s. We have air superiority and over some places air supremacy. So we can get our aircraft in over there. We can pinpoint targets. We can destroy these power plants. Maybe there's a military connection to this, maybe military necessity. A lot of people will say it's a war crime because mostly these power plants are probably there for the civilian population. And so it'll be certainly a questionable call if we do this. But then the retaliation, if Iran can retaliate, and thus far they have shown every ability to retaliate, then there's more hardship imposed on our friends and allies in the region, in the Gulf. And this doesn't still open the Straits of Hormuz, and that's the problem.
General, would you see it as a war crime?
I think you got to look at it under military law, and it's one of those things that's questionable. People are going to argue both cases, but you cannot destroy civilian assets in an effort to put harm on the population. Now, if you can show it has a military connection, that's different. But if it's simply to put pressure on the government...
That's not just military escalation, that's regional instability. Because when infrastructure gets targeted, it's not just governments that feel it, it's civilians, entire populations. And once that starts, it's very hard to contain. Now add another layer to this. Because this conflict doesn't exist in isolation. There are allies involved, regional partners, global markets watching every move, and every decision, every escalation, has ripple effects far beyond the battlefield. That's why experts keep emphasizing something simple. This isn't a short-term situation. Even in the best-case scenario, it's complex. And in the worst-case scenario, it expands. Now, while all of this is unfolding, there are also voices fully supporting the current approach. They're focused on one thing: neutralizing threats. Which sounds straightforward, but here's the challenge. Removing a threat doesn't automatically create stability, and that's the part that often gets overlooked. Because history has shown you can win battles and still struggle with what comes after. That's why Clark keeps coming back to the same idea. What's the end game? Not just the immediate objective, but the long-term outcome. Because without that, you're not finishing something, you're stepping into something. And once you're in, getting out becomes the real challenge. Now let's talk about timing, because this is happening fast. Decisions are being made quickly, statements are being made even faster, and in that environment, clarity matters more than ever. Because every mixed message, every contradiction, adds to the uncertainty. And uncertainty in a situation like this can change everything. Now here's the reality. We're still in the early stages of this, which means a lot of things are still unknown. But what we do know is that experts are raising concerns. Not casually, not quietly, but directly. publicly, and with very specific warnings. And at the same time, leadership is projecting confidence. So the question becomes, which perspective is closer to reality? Is this a controlled situation, heading toward a defined outcome? Or is it something much more unpredictable, with risks that are still unfolding? Because if the warnings are even partially accurate, this could become far more complicated than it's being presented. And if the confidence is misplaced, the consequences won't be immediate. They'll build over time. That's how these situations evolve, not with one dramatic moment, but with a series of decisions, each one shaping what comes next. And right now, we're watching those decisions play out in real time. So when a general steps forward and lays out risks this clearly, it's worth paying attention. Because this isn't speculation. This is experience talking. And experience, especially in situations like this, has a way of being right more often than people expect. Which brings us back to that first moment, that initial warning. Because now, with everything else we've seen, it hits differently. This isn't just about what's happening right now, it's about where this could go next, and whether the people making decisions are fully prepared for that. Because if they're not, then what we're seeing now might just be the beginning. And if you find this helpful, hit like, subscribe, hit the bell.